Good morning. We've come to the end of another week of our devotions as we continue through this journey entitled The Storied World of the Bible. And as we end the week, we are going to continue in that. Just before we look at the next video, we are going to say the Jesus Creed out loud together. So let's say it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There are no commands greater than these. Okay, here we have the next video in this incredible series.
Give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to a king's son. May he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. May the mountains yield prosperity for the people, and the hills in righteousness. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people, give deliverance to the needy, and crush the oppressor. May he live while the sun endures, and as long as the moon throughout all generations. May he be like rain that falls on the mown grass, like showers that water the earth. In his days may righteousness flourish, and peace abound until the moon is no more. May he have dominion from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. May his foes bow down before him, and his enemies lick the dust. May the kings of Tarshish and of the isles render him tribute. May the kings of Sheba and Seba bring gifts. May all kings fall down before him, all nations give him service. For he delivers the needy when they call, the poor and those who have no helper. He has pity on the weak and needy, and saves the lives of the needy. From oppression and violence he redeems their life, and precious is their blood in his sight. Long may he live. May gold of Sheba be given to him. May prayer be made for him continually, and blessings invoked for him all day long. May there be abundance of grain in the land. May it wave on the tops of the mountains. May its fruit be like Lebanon, and may people blossom in the cities like the grass of the field. May his name endure forever, his fame continue as long as the sun. May all nations be blessed in him. May they pronounce him happy. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who alone does wondrous things. Blessed be his glorious name forever. May his glory fill the whole earth. Amen and amen. The promise of God to David in 2 Samuel 7 was fulfilled clearly in the narrative in what happened after David's death when his son Solomon, he had a great many sons, but Solomon was the chosen one, Solomon becomes king. And Solomon decides that he is going to build the temple for the Lord, which David had wanted to build but wasn't allowed to build. But before that happens, there is a note struck early on in 1 Kings, which is of enormous importance for the way in which people understood kingship thereafter. It's the note of wisdom. Solomon is famous subsequently as the archetypal wise man, the man who knows all kinds of secrets about the heavens and the earth, the man who understands things, who discerns. Because Solomon is quite young when he becomes king, and in the story, Solomon is offered by God in a dream anything that he wants. What would you like to ask for, he says. And Solomon prays for wisdom. And God says, because you have asked for wisdom, and not all the other things that many people might have asked for, I will give you wisdom. I will make you the wisest man ever. And that's put to the test almost at once when Solomon has to perform a rather small but significant act of judgment, and in a flash he sees how to do it and gets through the issue, and people say, oh, we have a wise king, this is good. But the climax of Solomon's early reign is the planning and then the building of the temple. And as we've seen in looking at Genesis 1, when you build a temple, you are building a small working model of the whole of creation, the heavens and the earth, because the temple is the place where God and humans get it together. The ark at the center of the temple, as it was at the center of the shrine, the tabernacle in the wilderness, is the place where God and God's people meet. And the king is the one who builds the temple, and the king actually here in 1 Kings offers sacrifice. He doesn't just delegate that to the priests, but the king and the priests together are the focal point of the worshipping life of Israel. Israel was called to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And as such in Exodus, they built the tabernacle. Now this comes to into a whole new dimension, with Solomon as the wise king who constructs this house where heaven and earth come together, where God comes to dwell. And as a result, the kings and queens of the earth come to pay homage to Solomon. And this is an image which comes in the Psalms, which comes in Isaiah, which then comes to a fresh fulfillment, of course, when wise men from the east come to visit the baby Jesus in Matthew chapter 2. But it's there through many traditions, because Solomon is visited by, among others, the Queen of Sheba, who comes from the ends of the earth to hear his wisdom, and who says at the end of it all, "Well, I'd heard how wise you were, but the half was not told me." Solomon is the archetypal wise king. Of course, sadly, Solomon, like David before him, like Abraham, like Jacob, like Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, Solomon gets it horribly wrong as well. Again and again, the narrative does not spare the blushes of even the greatest men of Israel's great narrative. And so Solomon gradually, little by little, not suddenly like David committing adultery with Bathsheba, but step by step, Solomon takes more and more wives to himself. Many of these wives are from foreign nations, and when they come from foreign nations, they bring their foreign gods. And Solomon, enjoying the company of all these amazing women, goes and worships their gods with them. And that is the beginning of the end. Because David himself, despite his adultery, David's heart was true in terms of his worship. That's why quite soon after his adultery, he actually confesses in deep shame and sorrow, because his heart is true. But Solomon's heart is turned away from the Lord to worship and serve other gods. The primal human sin is idolatry. And even though in Solomon's reign, this doesn't lead to anything terrible that Solomon then goes and does, what happens is that after Solomon's death, the kingdom is divided. And one of Solomon's servants, Jeroboam, is made king over the northern tribes, and Solomon's son Rehoboam only has the southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, with such Levites as are there. And this is the beginning of the long sequence which goes, according to Deuteronomy 27, 28 and 29, all the way downhill towards exile. But just because that's the way it's going, and the story of the kingdoms from there on is many-sided, and there are good things that happen and bad things that happen throughout 1 and 2 Kings, just because of that, that doesn't stop Israelite poets and prophets looking at this divine ideal of kingship and seeing in that divine ideal a repristination of the purpose of God for humans. God, remember, wanted to run the world through human beings. God wanted humans to worship him, summing up the praises of creation, and so to be set in authority over the world. And at its best, the Israelite vision of monarchy was a sharp focal point of that. Give the king your judgments, O God, says the psalmist. Give your righteousness, your justice to the king's son. May he judge your people righteously and defend your poor with justice. And so in Psalm 72, which I'm just quoting there, we find this extraordinary image of two things going on. Psalm 72 is all about the true king who will do justice for the whole world. This is like David and Solomon plus, as the psalmists look beyond the present rather sorry state of the later monarchy and say, we want a king like David and Solomon, only more so, one who'll do it all this time. And they take those promises to Abraham, the promise that in his seed all the families of the earth will be blessed. And they take those promises to Israel, that Israel would be the royal priesthood, the holy nation, that all the world belongs to God and Israel will have a role in relation to them. And they say, may the mountains yield prosperity for the people and the hills in righteousness. This is going to be a new creation. May this king defend the cause of the poor of the people, give deliverance to the needy and crush the oppressor. There is going to be justice done at last. Psalm 72, like Psalms 96 and 98 and many others, celebrate the fact that even though human kings and judges fail and get it wrong and worship idols and take bribes, God has not forgotten his promise. He has not lied to David, and one day there will come a true son of David who will do all these things. So then, says the Psalm 72 verse 8, may he have dominion from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. That is a universal dominion. The promise to Abraham about all the nations being blessed in him, being focused on and through the king. And hence may the kings of Tarshish and the isles render him tribute. The kings of Sheba and Seba bring gifts. This is again like Solomon, only more so. Because, why should this king have all this? Because he delivers the needy when they call, the poor and those who have no helper. This is the king who doesn't just fight grand battles, who doesn't just build grand buildings, but who listens for the cry of those who have no one else to listen out for them. That's a wonderful biblical vision of justice, which goes back, like so much else, to the Pentateuch, to the idea of a jubilee, of a time when debts are forgiven, of a time when the poorest of the poor are looked after. Some of the legislation in the Pentateuch is about what to do when you're having a harvest, that you mustn't just collect every last scrap, you must always leave some for the poor. All that comes to fresh focus in these visions of the king who has pity on the weak and the needy. And so, says the psalm, may his name endure forever, his fame continue as long as the sun. May all nations be blessed in him. This is precisely Genesis 12 brought into fresh focus by the promises to David. And then the psalm finishes fascinatingly with a temple image. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who alone does wondrous things. Blessed be his glorious name forever. May his glory fill the whole earth. Amen and amen. And suddenly we realize what all this is about. This is a vision of new creation. But in this vision of new creation, the divine glory will fill not just one house, the tabernacle in the wilderness, or the shrine in Jerusalem, the temple Solomon built. Yes, the divine glory came to dwell there when Solomon built the temple. It was just like that scene in the wilderness, only more so. But now God's glory will fill the whole earth. The king, in other words, is the temple builder who builds the house so that God's glory may fill it, but also the justice bringer who does justice for the poor and the needy so that God's glory may fill not just one building, but the entire creation. From there is a straight line to the Gospel of John, with Jesus as the one in whom the divine glory comes to tabernacle, to dwell, with Jesus as the one who launches the project of new creation by defeating the powers of evil in his death and by starting in the resurrection, the physical new creation itself. And there's a line all the way forward to the end of the book of Revelation, to the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven, so that now the dwelling of God is with humans, so that he will dwell with them. And, like the king in Psalm 72, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. That is the royal vision, which is why in Revelation 21 it says of all those now who are part of this New Jerusalem, I will be their father, and they will be my sons and daughters. The promise made to David, the promise which came through in Jesus, now, if you like, democratized so that it applies to all God's people. So we see in a psalm like this how the narrative works. The narrative which starts with a good creation, which continues with the disaster of Genesis 3 through to 11, and then gives rise to the promise to Abraham, the fulfillment of that promise to begin with in the Exodus, which is a moment of new creation, which is a moment of rescue, and then which gives rise to the tabernacle in which the divine glory comes to dwell, the small working model of new creation. And then via the temple in Jerusalem, built by Solomon, to this glorious picture of a coming king through whom the whole creation will be blessed. But Psalm 72 isn't the only psalm that says things like this. In Psalm 2, very near the start of the Psalter, obviously, we have quite a sharply focused passage which the early Christians drew on liberally to understand what had happened in Jesus. The psalm starts with quite a violent scene. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed. That's the king, saying, let us burst their bonds asunder and cast their cords from us. In other words, here are the nations looking at Israel, looking at Israel's king and saying, why should we serve this God? Why should we serve this king? We're not going to have any of that. This is, if you like, a small, sharp picture of the kingdoms of the earth and the kingdom of God, one of the great themes of all Scripture, because what happens next, just as with the Tower of Babel, God looks down and comes down to see what these strange humans are up to, and then sorts it all out. So in Psalm 2, verse 4, he who sits in the heavens laughs. God has them in derision, and he speaks to them in wrath and fury and says, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. In other words, when God establishes the true king, David's greater son, then this is finally going to bring peace to the warring nations of the earth. And so the psalm goes on, verse 7, I will tell of the decree of the Lord. And this is the king himself speaking. He said to me, you are my son. This day I have begotten you. Echo of 2 Samuel 7, of course. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, the ends of the earth your possession. Heritage, inheritance, possession. These are themes which go all the way back to Abraham and all the way forward to Paul in letters like Romans and Galatians. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Well, we know that that gets translated into quite a different mode in the New Testament. But the point is this, verses 10 and 11. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, you rulers of the earth. And so the fact that God has established his true king in Jerusalem is the sign to the pagan nations that God is God and that they are not, and that they must learn, yes, wisdom from him. So much comes together in this psalm. The Solomonic picture of the truly wise king from whom the nations learn wisdom, the Davidic picture of the one who has actually defeated the nations of the earth and now is ruling over them. And somehow this all comes together in the New Testament, so that in the book of Acts, chapter 4, the disciples, after they've been threatened by the official court, they actually pray Psalm 2, and they say, this has happened to us. The nations got together, Herod and Pilate and the chief priests, and they conspired and put Jesus to death. But God has raised him from the dead. In other words, God has said of Jesus what he said of David, you are my son. This day I have begotten you. In other words, the resurrection demonstrates to the world that Jesus is the true Messiah, the true Davidic king. And therefore the message goes out, not a message of military conquest, but a message of wisdom. And the church to this day, according to the New Testament, has the responsibility, as a result of this entire narrative, to remind the world's rulers of what genuine wisdom looks like, of what genuine rulership looks like, the Psalm 72 model, of what genuine humanness looks like. And that is why one other psalm has to be brought into this picture at this point. Actually, a dozen at least other psalms, but one in particular. In Psalm 8, we have a picture of creation with humans in the middle of it. This is, of course, the Genesis 1 picture, the John 1 picture, already all over again. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. This is God's kingdom making its way amid the warring kingdoms of the earth again. But then the psalmist says, when I look at your heavens, like Abraham did, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? The human being, that you care for him. The Hebrew there is actually the Son of Man, that you take thought for him. And then it says, you made him a little lower than the angels to crown him with glory and honor. You've given him dominion over the work of your hands and put all things in subjection under his feet. Here we have the Adam picture with the David picture superimposed on top of it, and with Christian hindsight, the Jesus picture. It's the same story. The Son of Man, who has been made lower than the angels, and now, as the letter to the Hebrews says, crowned with glory and honor, with all things put under his feet, all sheep and oxen, the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea. O Lord our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. It's almost as though the author of Psalm 8 had been reading Philippians 2, that at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess Jesus, Messiah, is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Jesus, the truly human one, the Genesis 1 person, the truly Davidic king, and now Jesus, the human being, in whom the living God truly dwells, the one who has brought creation to where it was always meant to be going from the beginning, and the one through whom God is doing a new creation in which righteousness and justice finally dwell.